US operations, streamlining complexity in the world's biggest market. What is the world's largest market doing to streamline gambling oversight processes? Let's dig in. Sue Schneider, Sports Betting Community.
Thank you. Now I just need to be able to see my notes here. Again, my name is Sue Schneider. I've been in the business in the U.S. since 1995, so I have kind of the long view on what's been going on. In terms of the title, I'm not sure how much streamlining there can be in the U.S., but I guess we'll find out as we go along. What I want to do is to give you kind of an overview of what's gone on in the U.S. and where it might be headed a little bit. As many of you know that have been following this, that it's been pretty slow going for iGaming the last 6 years or so in the U.S., but the pace has really picked up since May of 2 years ago, or last year, I'm sorry, when the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was overturned by the Supreme Court, and that was a law that really prohibited sports betting in most jurisdictions other than those that took advantage of it 25 years ago when that law was first passed. What I want to do for those of you that may not be as familiar with the U.S. is give you an idea of who's in the ecosystem for what may be happening, particularly with sports betting. And we'll talk a little bit then about what some of the other product offerings may find in the future. One of the things in the U.S. is that the licensees must be terrestrial-based operators. There are others that can come in as partners, as technical partners, as marketing partners, and things like that, but it's really the main licensees must be land-based operators. You have big operators. You have MGM, the Caesars Eldorado monster that is coming together right now as merger. Companies that started out maybe as regional operators like Penn National and are now in some, I think, 18, 19 jurisdictions. There are a number of smaller regional casino operators like Isle of Capri, Station Casinos, Pinnacle, some of those that are now getting into this in a big way. The lotteries, some are coming in as regulators in their jurisdictions that have now passed legislation, and others are going to be operators. Oregon just became an operator of sports betting. Kansas is expected to be an operator of sports betting. So there are a number of them that really come in that regard. And I don't think you can discount them because I think that some of them may be big players in the future. There are tracks that are operating in some jurisdictions where they've licensed it. The Meadowlands in New Jersey is probably one of the more notable ones. When it comes to the internet-only kind of companies, the two big ones and another one that you may know of, two big ones that came out of the fantasy sports world, DraftKings and FanDuel, have really taken off primarily as partners with a number of operators out there. In some cases, they've been able to operate as a skin. If you're not familiar with that term, it's another license that a main licensing can have under them. And so they've been able to really work forward with that. Stars is another one, Bet365, Unibet is now there. So there are a number of European-based brands that are coming in and beginning to make some headway in the U.S. and getting licensed there. I think one of the things that is kind of interesting to see is that you're seeing more media come in. Yahoo is doing a deal now. Fox Sports has partnered up with Stars Group, and that's expected to be a fairly substantial operator in the future. Another factor that we have in the U.S. that you may not be used to is tribes, and they operate under compacts or agreements with the states, or in some cases they may actually go outside of that because they don't want to open up those agreements, and they may become commercial operators and get a typical license. We also see restaurant and bar chains. We have a group called Buffalo Wild Wings, and they're very, very interested and will probably be partnering up and getting a license on that. And then lastly, we have sports teams and the venues themselves. In the District of Columbia, in Chicago, and some other states, the teams themselves have actually offered to do that themselves. And you don't want to look at that ecosystem without looking at the suppliers, like the platform providers and the sports data companies. So the mixed bag is with the states. We now have 19 states that have passed the law, varying stages of operations at this point. Illinois isn't operational yet, but and some, like New York, doesn't allow mobile, only has upstate operators that are able to take advantage of it. You want to watch out for states like Florida, which now has some legislation that's probably going to be pending. There's not much activity yet out of Texas if you're looking at the bigger population states. And California really kind of tends to be a bit of a standoff still, as it's been. There is probably a proposal that's between the tribes and the tracks to take a look at that and maybe go to a vote next year. The card rooms have been left out of that, so I don't know how successful that's going to be in that regard. One of the things that I think is looking at what the federal role is or has been or will be. The American Gaming Association has fought the federal government being involved with any kind of gaming for a very long time, and I think that will continue. There's some question as to whether the federal government could potentially pass something that would be a harmonization of standards, at least, to be able to recommend then to states that want to come and get involved and say, okay, well, at least that you have this. But there's been quite a bit of resistance, I think, from the gaming industry with having the federal government involved. Sheldon Adelson has pushed for a prohibition bill in the past, and he hasn't really gotten very far with that. And I think the industry associations are working with the regulators associations to look at maybe they can accomplish, if they can accomplish that harmonization through the rules and regulations as opposed to any kind of legislation. One complication is the Wire Act, which the Department of Justice has continued to fight. And that is really kind of spooking investors out there. So that's kind of keeping a dampener on things a little bit. And the other thing that's a bit of a complication is the league fees. They're requesting, started out as royalties, it's been data feeds, it's been integrity fees, you name it, but they're interested in getting a piece of that. I don't know how much headway they'll have. There's, I believe, one state out of the 19 so far that has actually put some money in for that. And as one person testified in my state of Missouri when I was there, he said, we have commercial fees or commercial arrangements for data that we get through companies. And so if you're mandating another fee on top of that in the law, that's kind of double dipping. And then I think the last thing I want to mention is that I think hopefully the U.S. will learn from some of the issues that are going on here. And I would point to the glut of ads that we saw during a couple years back, we saw by DFS vendors. And I'm fearful that unless we have some sort of a way of having some self-control with that may provide some backlash. So we'll see what happens basically with that. I'm sure there are other pitfalls that we have to watch out for, but that is one that's probably the most prevalent that we've seen now happen in Australia, UK, other places that we hopefully will live and learn those lessons from there. So when the time comes, we won't have that same backlash. So, thank you.